It was a quiet night when Maya first saw the grave. She had heard rumors about it, the glowing grave at the edge of the village. People whispered that at night the grave lit up as if it had its own soul. Some said it was cursed, others believed it was a sign of something long lost. Maya, however, was a skeptic. She had come to visit her late aunt, and curiosity led her to the grave on the edge of the village. The villagers avoided that side of the cemetery. No one had dared to explain why the grave lit up every night, nor had anyone tried to stop it. As Maya stood there, the strange glow washed over her, casting an eerie, pale light. She looked around, but there was no one else in sight. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft hum of distant crickets. The grave before her seemed untouched by time. But the light, it was undeniable. It pulsed faintly, just enough to catch her attention. Maya walked closer. She could feel her heart racing, not from fear, but from the strange pull she felt. What was it about this grave? Why did it glow? And why did it seem to call out to her, even though she couldn't explain why? As she reached the stone, she noticed something odd, a fresh marking on the surface, faint yet visible. It didn't look like anything that had been there before, almost as if someone had been there recently, marking it deliberately. She stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. The night felt still, as though the world had quieted down just for her to witness this. She knelt down, touching the cold stone. A shiver ran through her as a sudden realization struck her. This was no ordinary grave. Something about it felt different, like a hidden story waiting to be told. But what was it? Maya wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions, but the glow made her doubt her reasoning. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of something unknown pressing down on her. She had to know more. She couldn't leave without understanding why this grave was so different, why it glowed in the darkness. Something told her that the answers lay just beyond the surface. The grave felt alive with energy, as if it had a purpose, a message to share. Maya's curiosity grew, but with it, a sense of unease settled in her chest. She had to come back. The grave was waiting for her. Maya couldn't stop thinking about the glowing grave. Every night the light seemed to haunt her thoughts, growing stronger with each passing day. The village whispered that the grave belonged to someone who had died long ago, under mysterious circumstances. Some said the person was a hero, others claimed they were a villain. But no one seemed to know the truth, not even the oldest villagers. Determined to find out more, Maya visited the local library, hoping to find any record of the grave or the person buried there. She spent hours searching through dusty books and faded pages until, finally, an old journal caught her eye. It had belonged to an elderly woman who had lived in the village long before Maya was born. The journal was filled with strange entries, but one in particular caught her attention. It spoke of a man named Ethan, whose grave was said to glow every night. Ethan had been a well-liked man in the village, someone everyone trusted. But his life took a dark turn when he was wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. The journal detailed how Ethan had tried to clear his name, but the village turned against him, driven by fear and suspicion. Maya could feel the weight of those words as if they were calling out to her. The light from the grave, it seemed, was tied to Ethan's tragic end. The more Maya read, the more she discovered. Ethan's death had been sudden and violent. He was found dead in his own home, a victim of a crime that was never solved. The villagers had believed he was guilty, even though no evidence supported it. His family was torn apart, and the village, once a close-knit community, became divided. Ethan's name had been forgotten over time, but his grave, the glowing grave, still stood as a reminder of the injustice he had suffered. Maya felt a deep sadness as she closed the journal. The truth was even darker than she had imagined. Ethan had never been given the chance to defend himself. The grave's glow, she realized, was not just a strange phenomenon. It was a cry for justice, a lingering plea from the past, begging to be heard. The village had forgotten him, but his soul had not found peace. The glow wasn't a curse. It was a sign that Ethan's story had not yet been told, that the truth was still hidden. Maya knew she had to do something. She couldn't let Ethan's name be lost forever. The glowing grave was a beacon, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. But where could she find the answers? What was the real story behind his death? And why had the village refused to speak of it? The more she thought about it, the more determined she became to solve this mystery. Ethan's story needed to be heard, and she was the one who had to make sure it would be. The following night, Maya returned to the grave, her mind racing with the secrets she had uncovered. She felt an odd mixture of fear and determination, as if the grave itself had called her back, pulling her in with an invisible force. As she approached, the glow seemed to grow brighter, almost as if it had been waiting for her arrival. The wind had died down, leaving a strange stillness in the air. The graveyard felt different this time, more alive, yet eerily silent. Maya knelt down beside the grave, her fingers brushing against the stone once again. The cool surface seemed to hum under her touch, and for a moment she thought she heard a faint whisper, as though the earth itself was trying to speak. She pulled her hand back in surprise, but the whisper lingered in her ears. Was it the wind, or something else entirely? Her heart raced and her instincts screamed at her to leave, but her curiosity kept her rooted to the spot. Suddenly the glow from the grave intensified. It wasn't just a soft light anymore, it was blinding, like a beacon in the dark. Maya squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The light didn't just radiate from the grave. It seemed to pulse, as though it had a rhythm of its own. The ground beneath her feet felt different too, as though it was vibrating ever so slightly, sending a chill up her spine. Maya's breath caught in her throat when she saw it. Faint shadows moving in the light, shapes that seemed to shift and take form. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely not either. She stared at them, unable to look away. The figures seemed to hover above the grave, their outlines faint but growing clearer with every passing second. The shadows twisted, almost like they were trying to communicate something. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, but it wasn't just the shadows. Maya felt something else, something more powerful, an energy that pulsed from the grave itself. Her head felt heavy, as if the weight of 1,000 emotions was pressing down on her. She wanted to look away, but something held her gaze, drawing her deeper into the mystery. Her eyes fell on a small object at the base of the grave, a piece of old yellowed paper. It was partially buried in the soil, and something about it seemed familiar. She reached for it, her hands trembling as she pulled it free from the dirt. It was a letter, but it was unlike any letter she had ever seen. The paper was old, nearly falling apart, yet the ink was still legible. As she unfolded it, she read the first words. "I am innocent. The truth will come to light when the grave glows." Her breath caught in her chest. It was Ethan's handwriting. He had written this letter before his death, perhaps even in his final moments. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't just a grave with a strange light. It was a message, a warning, and an appeal from the past. Ethan had known his death was coming, and he had left a sign, a beacon for someone like Maya, to uncover the truth. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shake again, stronger this time. The figures in the light flickered, growing more distinct, more desperate. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. Was this the work of the supernatural, or was it something else, something far more real and far more tragic? The light began to fade, leaving only a faint glow behind, and Maya knew she had uncovered a part of the puzzle. But it wasn't enough. The grave had more to reveal, and she was determined to find out what. The air felt heavy with unanswered questions, and Maya knew that this was just the beginning. There was more to this grave, more to Ethan's story, and she would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. The next day, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she found herself looking over her shoulder, expecting to see the shadows from the grave lurking behind her. The letter she had found weighed heavily in her hands, its secrets pressing down on her as she tried to make sense of it all. Ethan's words had been clear, but the truth was still elusive. What had he meant by, "The truth will come to light when the grave glows"? And why had his story been left unfinished? Determined to uncover more, Maya returned to the village the next morning to speak with the oldest residents. She had to know more about Ethan's life, his actions, his relationships, everything. She spoke to the village elders one by one, pressing them for any details about his life that might hold the key to his tragic death. but each conversation left her with more questions than answers. Then, one evening, Maya sat down with an elderly woman named Clara, who had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. Clara had known Ethan well, and she was the only person left who might have the answers Maya desperately sought. The old woman's eyes were filled with sorrow as she began to speak. "Ethan was a good man," Clara said, her voice soft and tinged with regret. "But the village was quick to judge him. They never gave him a chance to explain." Clara explained how Ethan had been accused of something he had never done. Betrayal, or at least that's what they had believed. A close friend of his had been found dead under mysterious circumstances, and the village had turned against Ethan, convinced he was responsible. But Clara was different. She had known Ethan all her life and could never believe he would do such a thing. She believed he had been framed, but no one would listen. As she spoke, Maya's heart ached. The pain of that time still lingered in Clara's eyes, and Maya knew that there was something deeper, something more than just a misunderstanding. Clara took a deep breath and continued. "Ethan tried to fight for his name, but they wouldn't listen. The night he died, they say he took his own life. But I don't believe that. I think he was murdered, and I think the murderer wanted to make sure no one knew the truth." Maya's pulse quickened as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The village had wrongfully accused Ethan, and then, to cover up the truth, they had spread rumors about his death. But why had no one spoken up until now? Why had Clara waited so long to reveal this? The answer came to her in a flash. The letter. Ethan had left the letter behind, hidden in his grave, knowing that someone, someday, would come to uncover the truth. The grave was more than just a burial site, it was a message. The glow wasn't a sign of curse or death, it was a signal. Ethan had been asking for justice, for someone to reveal the truth about his death. The grave had been waiting for Maya all along. She rushed back to the grave that evening, unable to wait any longer. The sky was darker than usual, and the glow from the grave was faint, but it still called to her. As she knelt before it, she could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, and she knew that tonight everything would be revealed. She opened the letter once more, reading Ethan's final words carefully. "To whoever reads this, know that I was not guilty. I gave up everything for this village, and yet they turned on me. My death was not my own doing, but theirs. The truth will come when the grave glows, when the wrong is finally righted." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She understood now. Ethan had sacrificed everything, his reputation, his life, to protect the village from something far worse. But the truth had remained hidden, buried with him. It was time for that truth to come to light. With renewed determination, Maya stood up and faced the glowing grave. The light grew brighter once more, pulsing as if in response to her resolve. She knew what she had to do. The grave wasn't just a place for Ethan to rest, it was a call to action, a request for someone to finally tell the world what had happened to him. Maya was the one who could do it. She was the one who would finally bring Ethan's story to the surface. As she stood there, the light around the grave seemed to intensify, and Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had uncovered the truth, and soon, so would everyone else. Maya knew the truth, but the journey wasn't over yet. Now that she had uncovered the dark secrets surrounding Ethan's death, she had to confront the real murderer, the one who had framed him and covered up the crime. The grave's glow was a sign that the mystery was far from finished, and Maya felt that the final piece of the puzzle was still hidden somewhere in the village. But time was running out. The villagers had grown uneasy with Maya's questions. They whispered behind her back, calling her foolish for digging up the past, but she couldn't stop now. Ethan's name needed to be cleared, and the person responsible for his death had to face the consequences of their actions. One evening, as Maya walked through the village square, she spotted an older man, Daniel, who had been one of the loudest voices in accusing Ethan all those years ago. Daniel was well respected in the village, a pillar of the community, but Maya could see the guilt in his eyes. It was as if he knew something he had never told anyone. She approached him, her heart racing. "Daniel," Maya said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "I need to know the truth. You were there when Ethan was accused. You were one of the first to say he was guilty. What happened that night?" Daniel's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Maya thought he might turn away. But then, he sighed deeply, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He looked around, ensuring no one was listening, before motioning for Maya to follow him down a narrow alley. When they reached a quiet spot, away from prying eyes, Daniel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted any of this to happen," he began. "But I was scared, Maya. The night Ethan died, I was there. I saw him with my own eyes, and I was one of the ones who left him to die." He paused, his face twisted in regret. "But I wasn't the one who killed him." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "Then who did?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel's eyes dropped to the ground. "It was Victor, the village's blacksmith. He was the one who had a problem with Ethan. They were friends once, but something happened between them. Something none of us understood. Ethan had found out something about Victor's past, something dangerous. And Victor didn't want anyone to know." Maya's mind raced as she pieced the story together. Ethan had uncovered the truth about Victor's dark past, perhaps something criminal or immoral, and in a panic, Victor had killed him to keep the secret hidden. The village, blind to the truth, had turned on Ethan, thinking he was guilty of some unknown crime. And Victor, the one who had orchestrated it all, had walked away unscathed. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Maya asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I was scared," Daniel replied, his voice shaky. "I thought if I spoke up, Victor would kill me too. The village trusted him. They trusted the wrong person." Maya felt the weight of his confession. She understood now. Ethan hadn't just been a victim of fate. He had been a victim of betrayal. Victor had used his power and influence to cover his tracks, and the grave's glow had been the only way for Ethan to speak out from beyond the grave. The truth was finally coming to light. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She had to confront Victor. She had to make him confess. But as she walked back to the village, she realized something crucial. The grave had led her here, but it was up to her to finish what had been started. She couldn't rely on anyone else. She had to be the one to bring justice for Ethan. As she approached Victor's house, her breath quickened. The air was thick with tension. She could feel the presence of something ominous, something that had been lurking in the shadows all along. The grave had lit up for a reason. It was time for the truth to come full circle. When Maya knocked on Victor's door, her heart was pounding in her ears. He opened the door slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw her. "What do you want?" Victor's voice was cold, but there was a hint of fear in it, something Maya hadn't expected. "I know what you did," she said, her voice unwavering. "You killed Ethan, and it's time for you to face the consequences." Victor's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "You don't know anything, girl. Leave now or I'll make you regret it." Maya stood her ground. "The village will know the truth. It's not too late for you to confess." Victor stepped back, his expression hardening. For a moment, Maya thought he might strike her, but instead he turned away, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand. The darkness has been with me for a long time." Maya's eyes widened as he walked toward the shadows in his house. But before she could react, she knew what needed to be done. The village needed to hear this confession, and Maya was the one to bring it to them. Maya didn't wait another second. She turned and sprinted from Victor's house, the weight of his words echoing in her mind. She knew what she had to do. The truth, the one Ethan had been trying to expose from beyond the grave, would not be silenced anymore. Maya rushed back to the village square where the remaining villagers were gathered, some whispering among themselves, others simply watching her. She could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't let their stares deter her. This was her moment to end the silence. The sky was dimming, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the stone streets. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the village itself knew that the long-hidden secrets were about to come to light. Maya took a deep breath, her heart racing, and stepped up onto the stone platform where the village meetings were held. She knew she had to speak loud enough for everyone to hear, for Ethan's story to finally be told. "I know the truth," Maya's voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs in the crowd. Ethan did not die because of his own guilt. He was murdered, and the one who killed him is standing right here among you." Gasps of disbelief filled the air as everyone turned their gaze toward her. Maya stood firm, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Victor, who had appeared at the edge of the gathering. His face was pale, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, but it was too late. The truth had already been set in motion. "Ethan had discovered something about Victor," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Something so dark that Victor couldn't let it get out. And so he killed Ethan to keep his secret safe. He framed Ethan for a crime he didn't commit and watched as the village turned its back on him. But now, the truth has come to light and it's time for justice to be served." The crowd was silent, stunned by Maya's words. Victor stood frozen, his eyes flickering between the villagers and Maya. Finally he spoke, but his voice was nothing like the cold confidence he had earlier shown. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "The darkness that consumed me, it was too powerful. I couldn't control it." Maya's heart sank as she watched Victor, realizing just how deep his fear and guilt ran. He was a man broken by his own demons, someone who had allowed his past to destroy not only Ethan's life, but his own. "I understand more than you think," Maya replied, her voice quiet but firm. "The truth is, we all have our shadows, but it's our choice whether we let them control us or face them. You chose to run, and it cost Ethan his life." Victor's shoulders slumped, and for a moment he seemed like a man who had lost everything. The villagers, still in shock, began to murmur among themselves. Some were angry, others saddened, but all of them understood one thing now. Ethan had been the true victim. Maya had uncovered the lies, and now it was time for Victor to face the consequences of his actions. Suddenly the ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and the air grew still. The graveyard, just outside the village, glowed faintly once more. It was as if the grave itself was watching, awaiting the final act in this tragic story. Maya's heart pounded, knowing that this was the final chapter. Ethan's spirit, at long last, would be at peace. With a deep breath, Maya turned to the villagers. "This is the truth," she said, her voice ringing out across the square. "Ethan deserves justice. His name will be cleared, and the lies that have haunted this village for so long will be washed away." The villagers, once divided, slowly began to nod in agreement. Maya could feel their guilt, their regret, and their relief. They had been part of something terrible, but now they had a chance to make it right. Victor's head hung low as he stood silently before the crowd, the weight of his actions heavier than any punishment they could impose. As Maya stood there, the glow from the graveyard slowly faded, leaving only the quiet stillness of the night behind. The grave, its purpose fulfilled, no longer shone as brightly as before, but its message had been received. Ethan had been heard, his truth had been spoken, and his spirit had found its closure. The village would never be the same again, but Maya knew it had been forever changed for the better. Ethan's story would live on, not as a tale of betrayal and murder, but as a story of redemption, of seeking justice in the face of darkness, and of the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. Maya walked away from the village square that night, her heart finally at peace. The glow of the grave had faded, but the light it had cast in her life would never dim.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.